I was just over here thinking, super good preachers. There's a difference between a good pastor and a good preacher, right? Here's my glasses right here. Are figure out what's going on in a text, at least for today, and then make a really good sermon out of it. And I do the first part really well. Figure out what's going on and bring you along. So oftentimes, these sermons are more of a Bible study than they are a sermon. And I hope you're okay with that. Just bring you along in this textual study with me. And if I had 10 more hours, I'd turn it into a really good sermon. I know this because I think I've told you, some of you know who Nadia Bolz-Weber is. And when I was a pastoral intern, I was hanging out. My supervisor was Nadia's former husband, Matthew, and that meant that I got to go to text study with Nadia and all of her hand-picked favorite pastors from the Denver area. So yeah, they're very smart people that I still read to get suggestions for. Nadia occasionally turns to me for poetry, but but I remember there was one week when we came up with some brilliant thing having to do with the guy who was not dressed right for the wedding, and he sat and wrestled with it at text study and came out with this great thing. And then I went in that morning and explained that text to people in this Bible study kind of a way. And then I went to Nadia's church that night and was like, oh damn, that's a good preacher. So she has a skill that I do not, but I'm gonna bring you along my A.J. Levine trip on this fig tree business. Because, so here's our story of, as Joel put it yesterday, the story where Jesus gets hangry and kills a fig tree. It's a curious thing for Jesus to do, and that's why we're talking about it today in our Curious Day. This summer, as I said, we're exploring how God is also creative and quirky and curious, much like us. And in the month of August, we are exploring things about God that are curious. When we talk about ourselves being curious, we mean both things, really. We're curious about God, we're curious about life, we're curious about our neighbors, I hope. And we are also probably kind of curious characters ourselves. At least I resemble that remark. I don't know about you. But when we speak of God, we know that God knows all things, or that's what I believe anyway. And since we don't know all the things, we find God curious. That's what I mean. So we'll wander together through some strange texts during this month and see what good news we might find there. This week is this strange story from the Gospel of Mark, the story of Jesus cursing this fig tree. We don't normally see Jesus cursing things. In fact, this is the only story where that happens, and it's weird. It looks like he just got hungry, and he goes to this fig tree, but it doesn't have any fruit because it's not the right season to have fruit, and so he curses it. He says it will never bear fruit again, and a little while later, like the next morning in the Gospel, they pass by this same tree, and the disciples note, oh, the tree's dead. What? So my thoughts and interpretation, as I said, around this text are heavily influenced by Professor Dr. Amy Jill Levine in a book she called The Gospel of Mark. Clever. AJ is one of the fabulous speakers that we heard at the Wild Goose Festival, and anyone who went to the first session went to the second session too, because it's that good and the place is just packed. She is a Jewish New Testament scholar. So take a little time to think about that, with a little reminder that the New Testament brings the birth of Jesus and tells about the birth of Christianity, so it is not part of Jewish Bible. But A.J. Levine is a New Testament teacher, and part of what is great about her is that she's interested in helping people like me not interpret our sacred text as being anti-Semitic, which we kind of do whether we know it or not. So, First, AJ says that she sees Mark as an author or storyteller who is provocative. He draws readers in and then just encourages conversation about and continuation of the stories. You will remember, because we've talked about it a lot in the last year, that this is that very fast gospel where everything happens immediately. Remember? Well, it does. The word immediately appears a whole bunch of times. And for those people who read the book with me, when we read the whole gospel like that first, sometime last, like Holy Week or right before Holy Week or something like that. And I told you also that I read it with the confirmation students, and they ate like an M&M for every time the word immediately showed up. So you can notice it. So basically, Mark just like drops in these little stories, and they're like 2 lines long, and then runs away. Even the end of the gospel, which is where Jesus dies on a cross, and then at the end, well, the women run away from the empty tomb afraid. When Andrew Lloyd Webber put that on stage in John's favorite musical, Jesus Christ Superstar, it ends with Jesus' death, and Christians were scandalized. Not all Christians, of course, because it didn't end with the resurrection, but that is literally how the Gospel of Mark ends. So he starts conversation, continues the story. So, as I said, this will be a little study-ish. You'll note that in the text, we get this story about this fig tree with no fruit that Jesus curses. And then we get him going to Jerusalem right away, to the temple immediately. And this, in this gospel, is where Jesus gets uncharacteristically mad, as far as we know, and yells at people and knocks over tables and says that this, his Father's house, which should be a house of prayers, has been turned into a den of robbers. And Levine would point out, and I'd never thought of this before, that a den of robbers is actually not where robbers go to steal from people. It's where they go to like hide their loot and hide themselves, like the, I was going to say the Bat Cave, but they're not robbers, but like, like the place where you, yeah, mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, right, the gangsters and like, yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, like that. So that's weird. They're calling the temple that, a place where people hide. Really interesting. Also interesting because you'll remember, no, you won't remember this. I'll just tell you about it. There's a place, one of the first people who's like, names Jesus as like I can't remember what he calls him. He's like, there's like a demon in the temple. And he's like one of the first people to call Jesus out and say, "What have you to do with us?" Remember I did my Gollum impression on this day? Son of God. And Jesus is like, shh. And it was in the temple that happened. So here we've got demons hanging out in the temple. We've got, it's a den of thieves. So interesting perspective from the writer, Mark. So then Levine says, Jesus, who fed the 5,000 with a few loaves and fish, is hungry. He had wanted to make this tree bear, if he had wanted to make this tree bear fruit, he could have. So that suggests that something different is going on. So he starts looking into all the fig tree, she starts looking into all the fig tree references in the Bible, because that often gives us some kind of cultural context. And understanding of what is going on. I'm going to spare you the word study through that, all of the fig journey. But this fig tree that Jesus comes on does not change its nature when he comes upon it. It remains, as it has always been, a tree that operates according to the seasons. And then he goes into the temple, and the temple does the same thing. Jesus had hoped with his presence in Jerusalem that the temple would change its nature. It did not bear fruit when Jesus appeared in the same way that he thought. This is likely what Mark had in mind. And A.J. Levine, of course, doesn't like it. And I don't think we should either, because there's like no reason to believe that the temple is particularly corrupt and any more than any other human place. And we all are. I think I'm getting a little off track now. I just went off. So I'm going to go back on because I bet I say that later on. Oh, yeah. So here's what I want to tell you about Mark. which you might know. Mark was written like 60, 70 years after Jesus lived, and do you know what else happened about that amount of time after Jesus lived? Temple was destroyed. Yes, the second temple was destroyed. And so when you've got Mark writing in the shadow of the former temple, so anytime that you're hearing anything about the temple and what Mark is writing, it's already gone, most likely. I don't think I want to know what you found. Although it could be interesting. So it's been destroyed. So Mark is telling the story, giving us a prediction story that the temple will fall for not bearing fruit because it is so sinful, a den of robbers. The next part supports this fig tree equals temple even more. He tells his disciples, if you say to this mountain, be taken up and fall into the sea, but you do not, and if you do not doubt but have faith in your heart, then it will be done in your name. That's a powerful thing if you have enough faith. And guess what the mountain was that they were standing on when he said this? It's the Temple Mountain. So once again, he's talking about if you pray hard enough, this house of worship can fall into the sea. And of course, by the time they were listening to this, they were looking at the ruins of that mountain, whose temple had literally fallen down into the sea. So I, along with Dr. Levine, have two issues. Maris does too, because I saw her face. One seems to be that if you claim you have enough faith, pray hard enough, you can make these disastrous things happen. And that's problematic for all kinds of reasons, but certainly not provable anyway. And the other is that it suggests that sin can cause the temple to fall, that like it being a den of robbers is enough to make it fall. The temple wasn't bearing fruit, or the tree wasn't bearing fruit, so it dies, and it does so because Jesus has enough faith to make it happen, which is terrible because actually there's nothing, like I said, to suggest that the temple is particularly corrupt, or why would they even go there? Certainly no more corrupt than any human organization or people, and of course we are no exception here. We have our issues too, and if you demand from a group of people that they be perfect, whatever that looks like for you, you'll soon be standing alone in your own little group. And then you'll find out the awful truth, that you are just as imperfect as all the people that you cut out. And now there's no one left to blame. But obviously, it isn't true that with enough sin or enough faith, a place will be destroyed. We have in our lifetimes seen plenty of public places that have been corrupt, and those places remain standing. And plenty of places that have been destroyed. And to suggest that it was because of sin is, well, a theology I don't believe in, because it gets really problematic then when you start thinking about children who die, etc. So, if it's about perfect faith without any doubt, another purity culture question, then we may as well quit listening, because to doubt is human, and we will do it. Without doubt, there is no humanity. And that we persevere in the face of doubt is part of the human challenge. And there, in needing perseverance, is where prayer can help. Well, so back to this dead fig tree, this empty mountain. Here's what we hear from Dr. Levine. To curse is to harm, and with that curse we are left with nothing. Dead tree, destroyed temple. So be careful what you wish for, careful how you pray, and careful what you pray for. Here's one more weird thing. There's a missing verse in this chapter. If you have your phones, Google it, because we don't have our verse numbers up here. And plus, you have to see it in the actual Bible, not in like the slideshow we made. So, Mark 11, if you want to pull out your phones, look towards the end. And you'll see, someone just read for me verse 26. It is. And did you find that in the footnotes? Really? It's in the Bible you're reading from? Oh, I see. So if you look up chapter 11 NRSVU, it will go right from verse 25 to 27. Uh-huh. Weird, right? The next line has something to do with forgiveness. It's just not as harsh, right? So, yeah, what it says is, and you'll probably see it if you scroll down there might be footnotes that suggest that some manuscripts have this verse 26, which is why they sort of leave it. What it means is that the most authorities on the Bible have decided that this probably was not in the most original manuscripts, but was added later, kind of like that ending material at the end of Mark that also, there they just put it there, but it's like an alternate ending to Mark, and then you see Jesus appear. It doesn't end in that same way that I talked about earlier. Someone was like uncomfortable with the fact that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, so they like put an ending in there. That was written later, so later material. So that verse 26 says, "But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses." Now, if you take that and apply it to the fig tree story, it's giving us another warning. If you curse people, that also comes back on you. So, it's still a curious story. I'm not coming to the end and telling you that Jesus didn't actually curse a fig tree. The story is still there. There's no reason to believe it didn't happen. And I'm not even making it okay. I don't even like it. Why did he kill a fig tree as an object lesson about why not to pray like that? I don't know. Why was he so mad that day? I mean, I guess we know. First, in the book of Mark, we get a very, very human Jesus. And that allows us a way to see ourselves within Jesus for good and for bad. And Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, this very human Jesus, and he knows that he will die there. So he had some reason to be angry at the world that day. But to the best of our ability, it's best for us to make our prayers be for healing, for well-being, for restoration of that which is broken, for restoration of that which is corrupt. All kinds of things are like that in the world, and we might want to curse them, but we curse ourselves at the same time. And so those prayers for healing and reconciliation and restoration, assuming they work, are going to be the best ones for us. And may those prayers be more powerful than any curse. Amen.